Hello and welcome to another episode of the DVD Graveyard. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at Deathdream from 1974. This movie was also known as Dead of Night, among a few other titles I think it was released as, but I think Deathdream was the one that was finally settled on, and that's the title of it on this DVD that I have right here with me from Blue Underground. But on the main title, when it comes up, it still says Dead of Night. So I think that's what a lot of people still refer to this film as, which personally I think that's a better title for the movie. That's the one that I prefer. But like I said, I think it's commonly known now as Deathdream. This movie, and speaking of, before I get too far in, I have the Blue Underground release in front of me here, which has some of the worst cover art of any, I don't want to say of any film I've ever seen, but I just really do not like the cover art that they used for this. I prefer the one that was used for, I believe, the 4K release, which is probably going to be the one that I use for this video, but I just had to say that before I got into it. That's actually what stopped me from seeing this movie for a long time was, I don't just solely go by cover art, on movies anymore, but back then that's all you really had, was kind of the when you were picking up DVDs and stuff, that's really all you could go by was the cover art. And judging by this one, I didn't pick this movie up for a long time. I actually just got it within the past couple of years or so. I haven't had it for a super long time, and man, I was so disappointed that I didn't pick it up sooner, because this movie was so damn good. I really enjoy it. We're going to get more into that, but very good movie. If you see this Blue Underground release somewhere, don't judge it by just by the cover art alone, because if you do, like I said, it looks like just kind of a weird knockoff, strange kind of movie, but it's a very good film. Highly recommended. Anyway, this movie was directed by Bob Clark, which most people know Bob Clark as the director of, he did Porky's, but he also did, I think, a lot of people's favorite Christmas movie, A Christmas Carol. But Bob Clark also directed my favorite Christmas movie of all time, Black Christmas, which, if you're a horror aficionado, you will know of that film, most definitely. Not only is that my favorite Christmas movie of all time, it's my favorite, one of my favorite horror films of all time, and I feel like it was super influential. I feel like it does not get enough credit. It's very underrated. Black Christmas is such a great movie. And I would love to talk about that movie one of these days. Maybe I'll do that this year. I'll do a review of it kind of closer to Christmas time, because I love that movie. I'll watch it year round, but it's a tradition in my household to watch Black Christmas on Christmas. And this movie, I believe, was shot in 1972. But it was released in 74, and it was actually released just a few months prior to Black Christmas. So I think Black Christmas was released in October the 11th, I think, in Canada was when it was released. Coincidentally, it was the same day that Texas Chainsaw Massacre was released, which, I mean, my God, two of my favorite horror movies of all time releasing on the same day. That's mind-boggling to me. Now, however, Black Christmas was not released in the United States until December, a little bit closer to Christmas, which I actually think is a better time for that movie to come out. But again, it was released in October. This movie was released, Deathdream we're talking about now, was released, I believe, in August, early to mid-August is when, Deathdream came out. And I think it kind of flew under a lot of people's radar. I don't think it got a lot of theatrical releases, and I think it actually kind of got buried for a really long time. They actually talk about this in some of the documentary stuff that's on this particular DVD I have. It doesn't have a whole lot of special features, but it has a few, and I think I remember them saying something about that on one of the interviews or something like that with I think Richard Backus. And this is also, I believe, Tom Savini's first movie to work on. So, if you're a horror aficionado, you know Tom Savini. That name is a household horror name. And I believe this is the first movie that he worked on, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot going for this movie. It stars Richard Backus as Andy, and then John Marley, who is best known, I believe, for the Godfather, which I'm not a huge fan of The Godfather. It's never really been my type of film. I've seen it, but I'm again more of a horror buff. So that's the movie that I know him from, is this movie right here, Deathdream. And he does, deliver such an excellent performance in this movie as Andy's father. And great job. And like I said, this movie did release shortly before Black Christmas, and I think it pairs really well with Black Christmas. Of course, it was same director. Even the score is very similar, which I'll touch on that a little bit more later. Now, having said that, it is nothing really like Black Christmas. I think Black Christmas is the superior film, but this movie definitely has that same sort of kind of vibe to it in a way. Of course, not taking place on a specific holiday, but I feel like it really kind of has that. It has that same sort of style to it, that Bob Clark kind of style that he brought to both of those films. And I won't say that if you like Black Christmas, you'll like this movie. I'm not gonna say that, but I will say if you like this movie, you will love Black Christmas. If you enjoy Deathdream, Black Christmas is even better. But anyway, that's enough about Black Christmas. I can't speak highly enough about that movie. But so anyway, I will just get into this, and I'll read the plot synopsis. I'm not going to delve too deep into this movie, because honestly, the plot synopsis of this movie, or just the movie altogether, is kind of fairly a simple concept, and it's pretty straightforward. But again, I'll kind of touch more on that. So anyway, sorry, I gotta move so I can read this a little bit better. In this shattering variation on The Monkey's Paw, which that reminds me, this is based loosely on the story The Monkey's Paw. I should have said that originally, but synopsis said it for me. Grief-stricken suburban parents, Academy Award nominees John Marley of The Godfather and Lynn Carlin of Faces, refuse to accept the news that their son Andy, Richard Backus, has been killed in Vietnam. But when Andy returns home soon after, something may be horribly wrong. Andy is alive and well. Or is he? Produced and directed by Bob Clark of Black Christmas and written by Alan Ormsby, Deranged. Deranged is a great movie too. Deathdream became one of the very first films to confront the domestic ravages of the Vietnam War. More than 30 years later, it remains one of the most chilling horror films of all time. Deathdream was released under several different titles, including Dead of Night, The Night Walk, The Night Andy Came Home, and marked the grisly debut of gore effect legend Tom Savini of Dawn of the Dead. Blue Underground is proud to present this acclaimed zombie shocker fully restored from a long-lost negative, as well as exclusive new extras that include 2 featurettes, audio commentaries with Ormsby and Clark, and a definitive ad art gallery, and more. So yeah, I guess I could have just waited to say all the stuff I said at the beginning of this video for the plot synopsis, but oh well, I said it and we're here now. So yeah, so as this movie said, this movie was kind of portrayed as like in a way an anti-war movie. And it had a lot of commentary on the Vietnam War of the time, or at the time, which they were fresh out of the Vietnam War. And of course, this said 30 years later. This release came out in 2004. So this is a fairly old release. But yeah. Another thing that it said is, this is a zombie film, which I've heard some people kind of lump this into the zombie genre. Or call it a zombie film, if you will. And I guess you could say that because Andy kind of is, at the end of the day, he is a zombie, essentially. But this is far from a zombie film, in the traditional sense of the word. Again, kind of like I said with in one of my last reviews, City of the Living Dead, if you hear this as a zombie film, and you're thinking Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead or any of the Romero Dead films, you'll be sorely disappointed because it's definitely not that type of zombie film. But anyway, we'll kind of get into it. Like I said, I'm not going to delve too deeply in it, but I will kind of go over it briefly. This movie starts out with this we get some Vietnam, or this footage that's supposedly in Vietnam of Andy's death. And then we get this great title sequence, which, like I said, it starts out, even on this DVD, going by Dead of Night. And we get Andy's family, who are sitting around, and they basically receive the news that Andy has been killed in Vietnam, and they're devastated. It's horrible, and that they don't really know how to kind of cope with it. They're very emotional, but at the end of the day, it happens. This I'm sure this happened quite often, during that time. So one night, we see someone, we get this POV shot, again, reminiscent of Black Christmas, of someone hitchhiking, and, a truck driver picks him up. And the truck driver stops to get some cigarettes and some coffee, and he's basically saying, this soldier that I picked up, who was hitchhiking, he hasn't said a word to me the whole time. He's just been acting kind of funny, and, but I'm taking him, wherever he needs to go. And that's kind of the first hint of, something's going on. Again, we don't know that it's Andy yet. But anyway, the next day, it turns out that the truck driver was murdered. He had his throat slashed, and he had a needle mark in his arm. And everyone thinks that's kind of odd. He's taken to a coroner. The coroner kind of looks him over, and that's kind of where we get our little bit of exposition, about this kind of unsolved murder. Later that night at the family home, the family's woken up to some strange noises, and we get these really creepy kind of sound effects. I guess that's coming from Andy. These just kind of weird sort of breathing sounds. That's so spooky, and it's great, and that's when we get this kind of creepy score, which again is very reminiscent of Black Christmas, which I'm going to again talk about the score a little bit more in a little bit. But they come to find that it is Andy. Andy has come home, and the family is thrilled. They're, oh my goodness, Andy, you're alive. They sit down and they talk to him, and from the very get-go, we can tell that Andy is, there's just something wrong with him. He's very cold. He's very emotionless, just got this blank kind of stare on his face. And Richard Backus does such a good job in this role. I mean, he's perfect fit for this. He's so eerie and so creepy, with this kind of emotionlessness that he has. And they're like, Andy, can you believe that they must have made a mistake? They told us that you were dead. And he delivers this excellent line, I was, and that's all he has to say. He doesn't really say anything else. He's just being very cold and very distant, and he's just kind of staring off, into space. And the family just kind of laughs it off, and Andy's trying to I guess, be as normal, or put on this facade of being normal. So as they go on, again, Andy's just being kind of weird. He just spends a lot of time up in his room in this rocking chair. And that's one thing I can say about this movie is it's very slow. So again, if you're going into this movie, even thinking, it's more of a slasher or anything like that, it's really not. It's just a very eerie movie, and it has this really just creepy vibe to it. With all the scenes of Andy sitting up in his rocking chair, his dad's trying to talk to him and trying to kind of get him back to the old Andy, and Andy's just not having it. He's just blank face, sitting in his rocking chair. He's kind of going out at night and just kind of walking around, doing God knows what. And it's just very creepy. Richard Backus, again, very, very creepy in this role. And kind of as things go on, his dad is again trying to make Andy feel better, and so he brings all these neighborhood kids over to kind of greet Andy. And that's one thing I meant to say is Andy made sure to tell his dad he didn't want anyone knowing that he was home. Didn't want anyone knowing that he'd come home from the war. Wanted to kind of keep it on the down low. So his dad, agrees with him. All right, son, that's fine. So, but what he does do is he invites a bunch of the neighborhood kids to come over because they'd been asking about him. And the kids come over and they're kind of talking to Andy and trying to kind of just asking him a million questions, just as kids do. They're all kind of talking at once. And so then Andy sort of snaps. because the dog is kind of growling at Andy. And Andy kind of snaps. And in front of all these kids, he picks up the dog and he strangles the dog, in one hand. He strangles this dog. So, that's something, I guess, if you're sensitive to animal cruelty, or anything like that, definitely. The dog was not really injured, of course, but if that's something that bothers you, then that does happen in this film. And he strangles the dog, and of course it just breaks his dad's heart because, he talks about how much he loved that dog, and that dog was such a big part of his life, best dog he ever had. And at this point, he knows something is wrong with Andy. Like, he's certain. So Andy leaves, and just kind of takes off. His father goes to this bar and he's drinking and just kind of, I guess, coping with what happened. And of course, at this time, we're hearing on the news, that this truck driver had been found murdered. And the people at the diner had said, that the truck driver had picked up a hitchhiker, a soldier coming home from war. And his dad's kind of starting to piece things together, kind of here and there. And that's when the local town doctor comes in and kind of starts talking to the father, to John Marley, and he's, what happened, what's going on, and he tells him, Andy's home. He didn't want me to tell anyone, and he has killed the family dog. Something is wrong with him. I don't know what it is, but something is going on with him. So the doctor's like, I'll come by and I'll come by the house and I'll talk to him and I'll see, I'll give you my professional opinion, I suppose. So they go back to the house. The doctor comes and comes to the room with Andy, and Andy, I didn't know you were home, blah, 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 just kind of talking to him. And Andy's just being really cold, he has this great line, is this a professional call or a personal call, and, neither is needed, is what he's telling him, just being very cold and just, mechanical almost in a way. And it's great. Andy just really in this movie gives me the creeps, just the whole kind of vibe that he puts off. Just very, very spooky. Again, Richard Backus, excellent in this role. So the doctor leaves. And, again, he asked him a few questions on how he got home. He hitchhiked and all this other stuff is, what Andy tells him. And the doctor, as he's leaving, he tells the father that, he's got to report this to the police. It's just too coincidental. He's like, I'm sure it's nothing, but I have to report it because Andy was hitchhiking. He is a soldier. And this truck driver, who was murdered, supposedly said that he had picked up a soldier. Your son came home the same night that the truck driver was found murdered. Very coincidental, And the father's, please just let me talk to him first, and we'll kind of get to the bottom of this, and then if all else fails, then you can go to the police. He's trying to protect his son, which is understandable. So the doctor, is okay. I'll give you that courtesy. So the doctor leaves. The father, John Marley, runs back upstairs to confront Andy about what's going on. He wants to talk to him, and Andy's gone. The mother tells the father that Andy has left. He went out, and the dad's, what the hell? Where did he go? What's going on? He took the car. All this other stuff. So then we start to follow the doctor, and the doctor is going back to his office, and all the way we see that Andy is following him, in this car. And the doctor gets in his office, and he's just kind of looking around, and he knows that someone's outside, following him. And he opens the door to leave, because I guess he had a call to go to the hospital. And when he opens the door, there's Andy. And Andy, is, I think there's some things that we need to talk about. So he comes in and he locks the door, and again, he's just giving this really, really spooky, eerie vibe. And this is where we really kind of figure out what is going on with Andy. He tells the doctor to feel his pulse, and the doctor says there is no pulse. He tells him to listen for his heartbeat. There is no heartbeat, and that's where it is confirmed that Andy is dead. Again, something has been wrong with him. He's dead. He's been dead this whole time, but somehow he's up and walking around. So Andy kills the doctor. He stabs him several times with this syringe. And kills him. And then that's where we learn that Andy has basically been taking blood from his victims and injecting it into himself, I guess to prolong his life. This movie does a really good job of visual storytelling. It doesn't just spoon feed you the information. It just really kind of lets you piece things together, which I really appreciate. I always like that. And again, we get this just creepy score. I guess this is the best time for me to talk about it, since I keep bringing it up. But the music, like I said, is so reminiscent of Black Christmas. It is the same composer who did the music for Black Christmas, but we get a lot of the same, just kind of the banging on the piano, the really creepy, very, very similar. I love it. I love the score for this movie. It fits it so well. And I'm really glad that the same composer came back to do Black Christmas. I cannot even think of his name. Is it on the back of this DVD? I feel really bad. I should have written it down. But the music is so good in this movie, and especially when it kicks up during these actual horror scenes, it's so great. And like I said, during this scene, this is really kind of probably the most gore we get in the movie is whenever the doctor's being stabbed. And Andy draws the blood. It's not much, but it is a little bit of gore. This movie's not gory whatsoever, but that's the little bit that we do get. And he injects the blood into himself, and he goes back home. And again, the father is just trying to reach Andy. He's trying to get across to Andy, and he basically affirms him, "Everything's fine, Dad. I have no troubles. There's nothing going on. You have nothing to worry about." At this time, I guess I should have mentioned earlier, Andy has a sister, and her boyfriend, they go to speak to Andy's girlfriend that he had before he went off to the war. And Andy's girlfriend is just elated. She wants to see him, and they plan to go on this double date that night. And, so she agrees, and they go home, and they tell Andy. Andy reluctantly agrees to go on this date. Again, he just not really showing any kind of emotion whatsoever. But he agrees to go on the double date. Around this time, that's when the father, he goes to speak with the doctor and tell him, Andy said there's nothing to worry about, yada, yada, yada. When he goes to speak to the doctor, that's when we find out he finds out the doctor's been murdered. So he goes directly to the police, and he's going to basically tell the police that Andy has been committing these crimes, that he's pretty sure that Andy's been the one that's doing this, but he just can't. So he ends up, kind of leading the police on a different trail. He gives them some false information to kind of throw them off of Andy's trail, and he leaves. And he goes back home, and that's whenever they want to take Andy away. They basically want to hide him, from all this. They want to protect him. And he finds out that Andy's left. He's gone on this double date with the sister, and he's freaking out because at this point he knows that Andy's the one that's been doing this. He knows for a fact. He's put everything together. He knows what's happening. So he's like, we've got to go, we've got to split this up. We've got to, do something about this. At this time, I forgot to mention this. This is a really cool scene. Andy, before he goes out on the date, Andy starts getting these kind of, there's like maggots starting to come out of his hands, and his eyes are starting to look really sunken in. He's starting to actually look dead. And so he just puts on some sunglasses and some black leather gloves, and it's a really cool look. And again, just makes him look so spooky and even more emotionless. And so while they're on the date, first they go to eat at this little drive-in restaurant. Of course, Andy hasn't eaten anything the whole time. He hasn't slept, he hasn't eaten, anything like that. And when they get there, of course, like I said, he doesn't eat anything there either. And they go to a drive-in, and when they get to the drive-in, Andy's sister and her boyfriend leave to go get some popcorn and some drinks and stuff. Andy again doesn't want anything. While they're away, Andy's girlfriend, I think Joanne is her name, she's trying to just kind of talk to Andy and be like, is there someone else? Is there something going on? What's the deal? And Andy tells her, there's nobody else, nothing going on. Nothing for you to worry about. But while he's talking about this, some juices kind of start to leak out of his head, ever so slightly. And she's like, oh God, what's going on? And Andy attacks her. And she rips off his sunglasses, and that's where he's got these dead eyes. You know, Richard Backus is wearing these contacts, which I think he said were just these huge contacts that he could only wear for like a very short period of time. And it is such a creepy visual. It's so spooky. He looks so disturbing whenever you actually see him. And of course, we kind of cut away to the boyfriend and Andy's sister coming back to the car. And they come back in, and Andy's in the back seat on top of Joanne. Again, I think is her name. That's what I'm going to keep referring to her as now. And he thinks they're just making out or whatever. And they're kind of talking, and then Andy pops up out of the back seat, and he's got blood all over his mouth. I guess he was in the back eating Joanne. And he's just got this scary, like his face is so scary, you know, with the contacts, and he's got the blood on his mouth, and he's really starting at this point to look decayed. And like I said, he's got the, his skin is starting to kind of fall off on his hand with maggots coming out and everything. It's great. Andy attacks his sister's boyfriend and strangles him with the speaker wire from the drive-in. He strangles him. And he gets in the car, steals the car, ends up running over this kid, which is probably the most violent scene in the movie, you know, whenever he runs this guy over. It's not gory or anything, but just the concept of what he does. He runs over this kid. Again, for 1974, that was probably pretty... He's not like a little kid, but he's pretty young. But he runs over him once, backs over him, runs over him again, and then leaves. And he flees the drive-in. At this point, the police are called, and the police are kind of on his trail. Andy gets home, and the mother starts to kind of try to protect Andy. She takes him upstairs, and she's kind of walking with him. And the father, at this point, wants to confront him, and he has a pistol. And he's pointing this pistol at Andy, and he's gonna kill him, but he just can't. You know, even though at this point Andy looks completely decayed, he really looks like a monster at this point. You know, in his face and everything else, he cannot kill him because that's his son. And the mother is begging and pleading, you know, don't kill him, don't kill him. You know, he's our son. You know, whatever. So the father backs away, goes into his room, and at this point the police have started to show up, and the mother decides she's going to take Andy away. She's going to take him away from all this. She's going to go hide him somewhere and take him somewhere where he'll be safe. And I guess at this point, it's really starting to take a toll on him because he's not getting around too well. He's kind of hobbling around. Like I said, his skin on his face is starting to droop and fall off, and very scary. And she's taking him away. We hear that the father shoots himself off screen in the room. You know, we see him put the gun to his head, and then as it cuts away, we hear the gunshot. So John Marley has killed himself because he just cannot cope with the situation. So this movie got very, very dark. Like at the end, it gets very, very dismal, you know, towards the end, which is great. I love this. I love how everything kind of comes together at the end. So Andy's mother is leading him away, and the police are shooting him. And as they get in the car and they speed off, and they're hauling ass through town. The car is on fire at this point. The back windshield's been blown out. And Andy leads them to a cemetery, and he grabs the wheel and kind of crashes through the front gate. And the pair get out, and they walk into the cemetery, and they walk over to this emptied grave, where earlier in the film we saw Andy was carving something on a tombstone, and that's where we see the tombstone has his name on it. He's carved his name on the tombstone with his birth year and his death year, you know, and Andy crawls into this hole and lays down, and he dies, just like that. He just passes away right there in this hole. And the police, you know, about this time, that's when the police come up and see what's going on, and the mother is just in shambles and just bawling, and you know, her son has passed away right here in her arms. Even though he was a horrific monster, you know, he's dead now, and she just can't handle that. And the police kind of just holster their guns, and the camera pans out, and then we get the credits. And that is it. That is the end of Deathdream. very great film. You know, I highly recommend it. It's not going to be for everybody. Like I said, this movie is really kind of slow, and there's not a lot going on in it. There's a lot of dialogue, and you know, I think that that's one thing that you know, people have kind of grown out of, you know, nowadays, is, you know, especially with horror movies, they want to see more visceral things on screen, where this movie is much more psychological. It's a great psychological horror film. To me, it is an excellent precursor to, like I said, Black Christmas. I've mentioned it probably a million times in this video already. Excellent precursor to that film. Like I said, I highly recommend it if you're in the mood for something really just dark and moody. You know, it is definitely a product of its time, but you know, if you're a horror aficionado and you can really appreciate films like this, I'd absolutely say give it a watch. I think it pairs really well with Black Christmas. You know, I think it would make a really good double feature. If you get the chance, definitely pick it up. This Blue Underground DVD is really cheap. Like I said, it has really bad cover art, but it's a great, you know, it's very cheap. I think even whenever I bought it, you know, a few years ago, it was still really cheap, and I think it still is really cheap. I think that there is a better version of this. I believe there's a 4K now out, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, if you don't want to buy it and you just want to check it out, you know, I believe it's on Tubi, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, like I said, definitely check this film out. Great little moody horror film, and yeah. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for the next episode, and until next time, have a good night and goodbye.